The thing that really concerns me about Starfield that I don't think a lot of people have really talked about yet is I feel like it's going to make a similar mistake to Mass Effect Andromeda. Similarly to Starfield, it had a really good system to go explore other worlds. Mass Effect Andromeda also had really good graphics, it had really good scenery, the world design was great, the combat was amazing. But nobody ever played a Mass Effect game for any of those things, and in fact it flew in the face of what the previous Mass Effect games was all about, which was really good characters and a really good story. When I look at the promotional material we've seen for Starfield over the last few months, it's really been pushing on the character customization, the ship customization, the ship combat, the normal combat that you can have. It's been talking about leveling up and all the different skills that you can have, and that stuff all supplements a really good RPG, but on top of that you do need to have a really good story. You have to have a really good reason to be playing for the game, and you want to be playing it with companions that are interesting and compelling, not dry, boring and safe. And what I feel is these companions that you have, when I look at them, when I hear their voices, they scream boring, dry and safe, and that's one of the things that really concerns me about Starfield, as well as the story, which I really want to quickly get into as well. There's a mysterious artifact within Starfield that basically you find, and maybe you interact with it in some way, it talks to you or whatever, and then you're tasked with finding the other two artifacts. To me personally, the question really becomes, if we look at a game like Mass Effect, which again is quite similar to Starfield in a lot of ways, the story there is much more compelling about some secret alien race which is going to wipe out the galaxy. However, so far from Starfield, it just seems to be some ethereal idea of something ancient and we don't know what or why. But you know what, I've been following Starfield for a few years now. I've watched all the promotional material and there's nothing really that drags me in. When I think about a universe like Star Trek or something like Stargate, just as two other space examples or even Star Wars, they all have a really compelling story, but I don't see anything like that within this game. So say for example in this game, the good guys actually seem to be the good guys, the bad guys seem to just be mindless raiders that you can just shoot and kill. It's not like the good guys are actually the bad guys, there really doesn't seem to be much nuance, the corrupt world really is just corrupt. The bastion of civilization literally is a bastion of civilization. And I'm sure yes there'll be trouble in Eden, but it doesn't seem like there's any overarching story which is going to drive things forward, which keep the sci-fi universe interesting. I just don't think that exists within this game, unlike the rich backstory which you would have in other sci-fi universes. Again, the TV show The Expanse is another really good example of how to do a sci-fi story right, and I just don't think that Starfield's really hitting the mark in that specific way. With Fallout, we had a series of games which were really interesting in terms of story. The context behind the game, of it being like a post-apocalyptic, kind of like 1950s type game, it was really interesting and compelling. But look, for now let's just gloss over that and just assume the story is going to be good and the characters are going to be good. One thing that does interest me is the idea that you're going to have 100 worlds to explore. And that does sound cool, but keep in mind most of that area is going to be procedurally generated, and then there's going to be pockets of actual custom made content. And so that means unlike in Skyrim and unlike in Fallout, you can't go off in a random direction and expect to find things. You will find a lot of nothing, or maybe, you know, plants and some animals which are just copy pasted over and over again. That does mean that the exploration is going to be a bit different, but that's not necessarily an awful thing, because it does mean that now the draw distance is going to be really big and you are going to be a bit more immersed because you can see much more around you and it's not like there's invisible walls. Now on top of this, there's 900 worlds which have no custom content, but they are still procedurally generated. The bit that interests me about this is for modders there's a lot of potential here. You could come back a few years later and there's actually a lot of additional content that wasn't there previously, and so for that reason there's actually a lot of replayability with this game that you may not otherwise have in other games, and there really is something to be said for that. There's also a few other interesting components of Starfield that you wouldn't traditionally see in a RPG game. One of the main ones for me that the devs have been talking about is the settlement system, which is very similar to how it worked within Fallout before. Obviously now they've renamed settlements into outposts, but the idea is the same. You build some pre-generated buildings and then you can add your villagers into the buildings, and maybe they help you research things you otherwise can't research. They slowly give you some resources and maybe you have to defend your town ever so often. And additionally as well, it's somewhere that you can house your companions that you find along your journey. Look, I don't want to be a dick here, but there are games that are specifically designed with that concept in mind. Something like Rust as one example of many I could come up with, which is all about building a settlement. Again, I just don't really know if that really fits what Bethesda needs to do. And likewise, that's pretty similar to my opinion on the spaceflight. As an example, you've got games like Elite Dangerous or maybe even Star Citizen, and they're going to have vastly better exploration for exploration's sake, and so I don't know if that's really something that the devs need to push hard on. I get what Todd's going for. He's trying to get like full immersion and basically an arcade version of lots of different systems. Like, I kind of get the mindset, but again, are they spreading themselves too thin? Now look, again, don't get this type of video twisted. I'm not saying that Starfield's going to be bad. I'm just saying that all this stuff that surrounds Starfield can help complement it, but it isn't what the main part of the game's actually about. And so if the game does have good ship combat, or good combat in general, or really amazing world generation, none of those things are super important if the story isn't good and if the characters aren't good. And again, we saw that with Mass Effect Andromeda. If you look back on that game, it was a massive step up in terms of exploration. It was a massive step up in terms of world design. It was a massive step up in terms of graphics. It was a massive step up in terms of combat. But it didn't make the game good because that isn't why people played that type of game. People will always play RPG games because they've actually got a good backstory, they've got good world design, they've got good characters, they've got good lore. I'm not saying that Starfield doesn't have those things, but I'm also not saying it does either. So far, I've seen no indication as to if the different factions that you have within the game, for example, are compelling and interesting and something you're going to want to interact with. A good example that did factions and world design really well is Cyberpunk, right? The world looks actually really good. It might not run well, it might be buggy. The actual individual quests may not be super compelling, but the lore surrounding Cyberpunk and the world that you find yourself in certainly is compelling, or the different factions are super compelling. The fact that Starfield isn't leaning into the types of characters that they have, it isn't leaning into the story massively, it isn't leaning into the world building, it does really kind of make you think, how is the game going to be in that department? Now look, I want to make one thing clear. The reason that you're not hearing a lot of other YouTubers really talk about this stuff is because honestly there isn't that much incentivization to make this type of video where you're kind of going against the grain and arguably kind of spoiling people's hype a bit about something they may otherwise be enthused about. To be honest, it's kind of a dick move, but at the same time I really feel like this type of video has to be put out there by someone. I haven't seen anything like this. And look, I do want to double down here and be a total dick before I kind of save it a little bit. The last game Bethesda Game Studios worked on was Fallout 76, and that wasn't an amazing game besides maybe the combat, which I guess was okay. And the game before that was Fallout 4, which wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't the best Fallout game that was ever released either. So I imagine the devs really do have something to prove in their minds right now, and I'm really hoping that is fueling them into making a really good game. Now look, technically this game only costs 11 quid to be honest, because you can get Xbox Game Pass for a month, play it, and then just not get it renewed. I think this is a game that a lot of people will revisit in a few years down the line at a discounted price when there's a bunch of mods. And also on top of that, maybe some really cool DLC, or the bugs have been fixed. I think that's a lot of what people are thinking right now. But look, as a massive fan of RPG games, personally, I am going to be going into this game, I'm going to be playing it. Hell, there's even a chance I might stream it on this channel. And look, I'm not a super pessimistic person, so I'm probably going to go in the game, I'm going to enjoy it even if it isn't amazing story. It isn't amazing characters like something like Mass Effect. It isn't going to be a game probably that I'm going to put down and I'm going to be disappointed because I know there's nothing else coming from this game series. But that's okay, I can't expect every game to be a masterpiece, and I don't think this is going to be one of them. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, and I really hope I am. I think this game's trying to juggle too many things at once to really do anything amazingly, but I hope I'm proven wrong. Skyrim only had 100 people working on it, Starfield has 300 people working on it, so look, the potential technically is there. I really can't wait to see if they actually do pull it off. Look, from a certain perspective, Bethesda Game Studios over the last few years has grown a bunch relative to what it was previously, and from that perspective you can kind of look at this game as a stepping stone towards Elder Scrolls 6, and as Bethesda Game Studios really returning to form with RPG games. Now look, I do encourage you to subscribe simply because I do only talk about RPG games on this channel. If you enjoyed this video, it's very likely you enjoy my future ones as well, so remember to subscribe, it does help the channel so much. It's been a pleasure, have a wonderful week, I'm out, GG, bye bye.